The IV needle had just pierced my vein when I heard her voice in the hospital corridor. That distinctive laugh, the one that used to comfort me as a child but now made my blood run cold. I turned my head slowly, the chemotherapy drip already connected to my arm, and through the small window in the treatment room door, I saw my mother walking past with shopping bags from Neiman Marcus and Tiffany. She was not alone. My brother Jason walked beside her, both of them tan and glowing, talking animatedly about where to have lunch. Mom's hair had fresh highlights, professionally done, the kind that costs $300. She wore a new cashmere coat I had never seen before, cream-colored and luxurious. Jason carried bags that clearly contained expensive purchases, the kind of shopping spree that required serious money. They walked right past the oncology wing where I sat hooked up to poison that was supposed to save my life, the treatment I had sold my car to afford the care I was rationing because my insurance barely covered half. My mother, who had sobbed on my doorstep 3 months ago, mascara running down her face, begging me for $20,000 because Dad needed emergency surgery, and they were going to lose the house. My mother, who had promised she would pay me back as soon as they got stable, who had clutched my hands and sworn this was life or death. The same mother who was now walking through this hospital not to visit me during my cancer treatment, but to cut through to the parking garage after a shopping spree that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The nurse administering my chemo noticed my distress, saw the tears streaming down my face, and asked gently if I needed a moment. But I could not speak, could not breathe. Could only watch through blurred vision as my mother and brother disappeared down the hallway, laughing about something, completely unaware that I was 30 feet away, fighting for my life with money I had to borrow from friends because I had given her everything. The crisis had been a lie. Dad had never needed surgery. They had never been in danger of losing the house. She had taken my cancer fund and spent it on luxuries while I sat in this chair, bald and weak and alone, wondering if I would live to see my next birthday. If you have ever felt used by the people who were supposed to love you most, if you have ever wondered whether you matter at all to your own family, please hit that like button and subscribe because this story is for you. Drop a comment below and tell me if you have ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own survival and keeping the peace with toxic family members. Your engagement helps this message reach others who need to hear it. Let me take you back to where this all started, back to when I still believed that love meant sacrifice, that family meant everything, and that my worth was measured by how much I could give until there was nothing left of me. I grew up in a rambling Victorian house on Maple Street in suburban Connecticut, one of those neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone and appearances mattered more than reality. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Dad worked as a regional manager for an insurance company. Mom was a stay-at-home parent who volunteered at the church and organized neighborhood potlucks, and we 3 kids were reasonably well-behaved and presentable. But inside those walls, a different dynamic played out, one that would shape the next 3 decades of my life in ways I am still unpacking. My earliest memory of understanding my place in the family hierarchy was at my 6th birthday party. Mom had promised me a princess-themed celebration because I had been obsessed with fairy tales that year. I had drawn pictures of what I wanted the decorations to look like, spent weeks planning what dress I would wear, invited all 12 kids from my kindergarten class. The morning of my party, I woke up to find Mom in tears at the kitchen table and Rebecca, then 8 years old, sitting beside her with a swollen ankle propped on a chair. Rebecca had been practicing for her gymnastics competition and had taken a bad fall the day before. The doctor said she needed to rest for at least a week, which meant she would miss the regional championship she had been training for all year. I stood in the doorway in my nightgown, watching Mom stroke Rebecca's hair and murmur soothing words, and I knew before anyone said anything that my party was not going to happen. Mom looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, "Sweetheart, Rebecca is going through such a hard time right now. She is so devastated about missing her competition. I think it would be really selfish to have a big celebration when your sister is suffering. You understand, don't you? You are such a good girl. We will do something special for you next weekend instead." I nodded because that was what good girls did. They understood. They were flexible. They did not make things harder when someone else was having a difficult time. I called each of my 12 classmates and told them the party was canceled. Mom helped me write a note explaining that my sister was injured and we needed to postpone. Next weekend came and went with no mention of rescheduling. When I finally worked up the courage to ask about it a month later, Mom looked confused, then irritated. "Your birthday was ages ago, honey. It does not make sense to have a party now. Besides, we just spent so much money on Rebecca's physical therapy. Maybe next year." That became the template. Rebecca was the star, the achiever, the one whose accomplishments were celebrated with elaborate dinners and expensive gifts and photo albums filled with proud moments. She won spelling bees and debate competitions. She made the honor roll every semester. She got the lead in school plays. And each achievement was marked with fanfare that seemed to grow more extravagant each year. When she won the state science fair in 8th grade, Dad took the whole family to Disney World to celebrate. When she graduated high school as valedictorian, they threw a party for 100 people with a catered buffet and a professional photographer. Jason arrived when I was 7, and his birth shifted the family dynamics even further. He was the boy my father had always wanted, the one who would carry on the family name and fulfill all of Dad's unfulfilled dreams of athletic glory. From the moment Jason could walk, he was enrolled in every sport imaginable. Soccer, baseball, basketball, football, swimming. Dad spent every weekend at Jason's games screaming encouragement from the sidelines, taking him out for celebratory ice cream after wins, analyzing what went wrong after losses. Mom organized her entire schedule around Jason's practices and tournaments. The refrigerator became a shrine to his participation trophies and team photos. I was wedged in the middle, neither the accomplished daughter nor the cherished son. I was the one who was easy, the one who did not cause problems, the one who could be counted on to understand when plans changed or promises were broken. I learned to read the emotional temperature of the house and adjust my needs accordingly. If Mom seemed stressed, I did not ask for help with my homework. If Dad was in a bad mood, I made myself scarce. If Rebecca needed something, I gave it to her without question. If Jason wanted to play with my toys, I handed them over with a smile. The financial dynamic started revealing itself to me gradually as I got older. I noticed that Rebecca always had new clothes for school while I wore hand-me-downs from our cousin. I noticed that Jason got a new bicycle every year while I rode the same scratched-up one from age 8 to age 14. I noticed that family vacations were planned around Rebecca's competition schedule or Jason's sports camps, never around anything I wanted to do. When I was 10, I desperately wanted to go to a summer camp for creative writing that one of my teachers had recommended. The brochure showed kids sitting in circles, sharing stories, spending time in nature, meeting published authors. I could see myself there so clearly, it physically hurt. I presented the brochure to my parents over dinner one evening, my voice shaking with hope and nervousness. Dad glanced at it briefly and said, "That is pretty expensive, kiddo. And Jason needs new football equipment before his season starts. Maybe next summer." I put the brochure away in my desk drawer and looked at it sometimes, imagining what that summer could have been. Next summer never came. There was always something more important, always someone else's needs taking precedence. The pattern intensified as we entered our teenage years. Rebecca got a car for her 16th birthday, a used Honda Civic that Dad had spent weeks researching and negotiating for. She named it Buttercup and drove it to school every day, picking up her friends, going to parties, having the freedom that comes with mobility. When I turned 16, I asked tentatively about getting a car, or at least access to the family car for school and work. Dad laughed and said, "You've got 2 perfectly good legs and a bus pass. Besides, insurance for another teenage driver would be astronomical. Rebecca needs the car for her college prep activities. You can catch a ride with her when your schedules align." They rarely aligned. Rebecca was always too busy, always heading in a different direction, always unable to accommodate my schedule. I rode the bus or walked even in winter when the Connecticut cold cut through my jacket and turned my fingers numb. I got a job at 15 working at a local ice cream shop, scooping sundaes and cleaning tables. I saved every paycheck religiously, keeping my money in a lockbox under my bed, counting it every Sunday evening and imagining what I would buy when I had enough. A laptop for college. A professional camera because I had discovered I loved photography. Maybe eventually my own car. That lockbox became a target, though. I did not realize it at first. It started small. Mom asking to borrow $20 for groceries because she was short until Dad's paycheck came through. I gave it willingly, happy to help, to feel useful and needed. She never paid me back, but I told myself it was only $20, that family helps family, that it was petty to keep track. Then it was $50 because Rebecca needed a new dress for a dance and Mom had not budgeted for it. Then it was $100 because Jason's team needed new uniforms and the coaches were asking parents to chip in. Each time I handed over the money. Each time there was a promise to pay me back that evaporated like morning mist. By the time I graduated high school, I had given my family over $3,000 from my carefully accumulated savings. I had no laptop. I had no camera. I had no car. I had no college fund. Rebecca was heading to Yale on a combination of scholarships and the substantial college fund my parents had been contributing to since she was born. Jason, still in middle school, already had a college fund that my parents mentioned proudly at family gatherings. When I asked about my college fund, Mom looked uncomfortable and said there had not been enough money to save for all 3 kids, that they had to prioritize. That I understood, didn't I? I attended the local community college, commuting by bus, working 30 hours a week at the ice cream shop to pay for tuition and books. I was exhausted all the time, falling asleep over my textbooks, drinking coffee until my hands shook, but I told myself I was building character, learning, independence, becoming stronger. My parents rarely asked about my classes or my grades. There were no family dinners celebrating my Dean's List achievements. No photo albums documenting my college experience. I was doing what was expected, nothing more, and expectations do not warrant celebration. During my second year at community college, I met Professor Sarah Chen, a literature instructor who changed the trajectory of my thinking, if not yet my life. She was in her 40s, brilliant and kind, with a direct way of speaking that I found both refreshing and unsettling. After class one day, she asked me to stay behind. I assumed I was in trouble, that my exhaustion was showing in my work, but instead she said, "You are one of the most talented writers I have encountered in 15 years of teaching. Your analysis is sophisticated and your creative work shows real promise. Why are you at a community college? You should be at a 4-year university with a full scholarship." I explained my situation in the vague terms I had learned to use. Money was tight. Family obligations. I was fine where I was. Professor Chen looked at me with an expression I could not quite read and said something that stuck with me even though I was not ready to hear it yet. There is a difference between being selfless and being self-erasing. Make sure you know which one you are practicing. She helped me apply for transfer scholarships and wrote recommendation letters that apparently glowed with praise. I got accepted to 3 state schools with substantial financial aid packages. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. When I told my family about the acceptance letters, hoping for pride or excitement or at least acknowledgement, the response was muted at best. Mom worried about how I would manage living away from home. Dad questioned whether the investment was worth it when I could finish my degree perfectly well at community college. Rebecca, home for spring break from Yale, made a comment about how some people are late bloomers and that it was nice I was finally getting it together. Only Jason, then 13, seemed genuinely happy for me, giving me an awkward hug and saying it was cool I was going to a real college. I chose a school 2 hours away, far enough to feel like freedom, but close enough that I could come home if needed. I packed my life into 6 boxes and 2 suitcases. I moved into a dorm room the size of a large closet with a roommate named Annika, who was from Minnesota and had never been to the East Coast before. We bonded over our shared sense of being outsiders, though our circumstances were vastly different. She came from a close-knit family that called her every Sunday and sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and encouraging notes. My family called when they needed something. College was a revelation. I discovered that I could think thoughts my family had never validated. I could have opinions that no one dismissed. I could pursue interests without having to justify why they mattered. I joined the campus newspaper and started writing investigative pieces about student issues. I took photography classes and spent hours in the darkroom watching images emerge from blank paper like magic. I made friends who asked about my day and remembered the things I told them. I went to parties where I was not the invisible middle child, but just another person trying to figure out life. I felt for the first time like I was becoming someone rather than just filling a role in someone else's story. But the financial requests from home did not stop just because I had moved away. They increased. Mom called crying because the water heater had broken and they did not have the money to replace it. Could I help out? Just a few $100s. Dad texted about Jason needing equipment for a prestigious basketball camp that could really boost his chances for scholarships. It was $1,200, but such an important opportunity. Rebecca needed help with her law school application fees. It was only $500, but she was applying to 15 schools and the costs added up. Each request came with the implicit message that I was selfish if I said no, that family comes first, that this was temporary, that they would pay me back. I worked 2 part-time jobs during college. I tutored freshmen in writing. I worked weekend shifts at a campus coffee shop. I picked up freelance photography gigs at weddings and events. Every spare dollar went either to my family or to staying afloat with my own expenses. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. I wore clothes from thrift stores. I never went on spring break trips or study abroad programs. I graduated with honors, but also with exhaustion that had seeped into my bones and made even breathing feel like effort. After graduation, I moved back to Connecticut temporarily while I looked for jobs. Living at home again was suffocating in ways it had not been before. I had tasted independence, had experienced what it felt like to have my own space and my own life, and returning to the family dynamic felt like trying to squeeze into clothes I had outgrown. Mom had opinions about everything I did. Why was I applying to jobs in the city when there were perfectly good positions closer to home? Why was I spending money on interview clothes when I could borrow Rebecca's old suits? Why was I being so secretive about my bank account balance? I found a paralegal position at a law firm in Hartford, a 40-minute commute, but the best offer I received. The pay was modest, but it was mine the first truly independent income I had ever had. I started looking for apartments, immediately desperate to move out to reclaim the autonomy I had briefly known in college. I found a studio apartment in a neighborhood that was politely termed transitional, which meant it was affordable and slightly sketchy but manageable. The apartment was on the third floor of an old building with radiators that clanked and windows that leaked cold air in winter, but it was mine. I signed the lease with shaking hands, feeling rebellious and guilty in equal measure. Moving out caused a family crisis I had not anticipated. Mom cried and said I was abandoning them when they needed me most. Dad gave me the silent treatment for weeks. Rebecca called to lecture me about being selfish and ungrateful after everything our parents had done for me. Only Jason, then finishing high school, seemed to understand, though he did not say it explicitly. He helped me move my boxes up 3 flights of stairs and said quietly, "It is probably good for you to have your own place. You have always kind of disappeared when you are here." His observation hit me harder than any of the accusations of selfishness. I had been disappearing. I had been making myself smaller and quieter and less present for so long that it had become my default state. In my apartment alone, for the first time in my life, I started to unfold. I decorated slowly with secondhand furniture. I refinished myself. I hung photographs I had taken on the walls. I bought plants and learned to keep them alive. I cooked meals I wanted to eat rather than whatever would placate everyone else's preferences. I was 23 years old and learning what it felt like to exist without constantly monitoring whether I was taking up too much space. Work was demanding but satisfying. I was good at the detail-oriented nature of legal work, the research and document preparation, and client communication. My boss, a partner named Margaret Kowalski, was tough but fair. She noticed when I stayed late to finish projects. She complimented my work and gave me increasingly complex assignments. She paid me fairly and never asked me to sacrifice my well-being for the job. It was a revelation to be in a professional relationship that felt balanced and respectful. 6 months into my job, I won a small settlement in a photography competition. It was only $1,500, but it felt like a fortune-like validation that my creative work had value beyond just being a hobby I indulged in spare moments. I deposited the check and allowed myself to dream about what I might do with it. Maybe I could finally buy that professional camera I had wanted since I was 16. Maybe I could take a weekend trip somewhere I had never been. Maybe I could just save it for emergencies and feel the security of having a cushion for the first time in my adult life. That dream lasted exactly 3 days. Mom called with an emergency. Rebecca's car had broken down and she needed a new transmission. The repair was going to cost $1,800 and they simply did not have it right now. Rebecca was interviewing for internships at law firms in New York and needed reliable transportation. Could I possibly help out? It was such terrible timing, but they really had no other options. I felt the familiar weight settling over me, the guilt and obligation, and the voice in my head saying that good daughters help their family, that this was what love looked like, that I was being selfish for even hesitating. I transferred $1,500 to my mother's account that evening. I never bought the camera. I never took the trip. I never had that emergency cushion. Rebecca got her car fixed and sent me a brief text saying thanks. 3 months later, I saw on social media that she had bought a new designer handbag that cost more than twice what I had given them for her car. When I mentioned this to Mom in a moment of frustration, she looked at me with genuine confusion and said I should be happy that Rebecca was doing well, that my jealousy was unbecoming, that I had always struggled with resentment about my siblings' successes. The financial requests became a steady drumbeat underlying every interaction with my family. Jason needed money for college application fees. Dad's car needed new tires. Mom wanted to renovate the kitchen and needed each kid to chip in $2,000. Rebecca was getting married and expected me to contribute to her bachelorette party expenses. Each request was framed as urgent and temporary, and each time I gave, I told myself it would be the last time, that eventually they would see how much I had sacrificed, that eventually I would matter to them as much as they seemed to matter to me. I kept a record in a notebook hidden in my nightstand. Every dollar I had given them over the years, every loan that was never repaid, every financial crisis I had helped solve at the expense of my own stability. The total climbed into the tens of thousands. I never showed anyone that notebook. It felt too pathetic, too revealing of my complicity in a dynamic I could not seem to escape. I was angry at them for asking, but more angry at myself for giving, for being unable to say no, for measuring my worth by my usefulness. Then I met David. It was a cold Tuesday in November, and I was working from a coffee shop because my apartment's heat had broken and my landlord was slow to fix it. I had claimed a corner table with my laptop and case files spread around me, nursing a large coffee and trying to focus despite my frozen fingers. David sat down at the table next to mine with his own laptop and an impressively tall stack of programming books. We worked in parallel silence for an hour before he asked if I could watch his stuff while he used the restroom. When he came back, I asked if he could watch mine. That small exchange of trust became a routine over the following weeks. We started talking during coffee refill breaks. He was a software developer working remotely for a tech company in Boston. He had moved to Hartford 6 months earlier because he wanted to live somewhere quieter and less expensive while he saved money to eventually start his own company. He was thoughtful and funny, with a self-deprecating humor that put me at ease. He asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. He remembered details from previous conversations. He seemed genuinely interested in my photography and asked to see my portfolio. When I showed him my photos on my phone, he spent 20 minutes looking through them, asking about the stories behind certain shots, commenting on composition and light with an understanding that surprised me. Our coffee shop acquaintanceship evolved into meeting intentionally for coffee, then into dinners, then into a relationship that felt unlike anything I had experienced before. David was attentive without being overwhelming. He respected my boundaries and communicated his own clearly. He split bills with me fairly and never assumed I would pay for things or do things for him just because that was what girlfriends did. He met my friends and genuinely enjoyed their company. He integrated into my life without trying to consume it. For 8 months, I kept him separate from my family. Part of me knew they would find something wrong with him, some reason why he was not good enough or why I was making a mistake. Part of me wanted to preserve this one relationship that felt healthy and reciprocal, to keep it protected from their influence. But eventually the separation became unsustainable. We were serious. We were talking about a future together. I needed to introduce him to my family, if only to stop living in 2 separate worlds. I invited my family to dinner at a nice restaurant on a Saturday evening in June-neutral territory that felt safer than either my parents' house or my apartment. I told David everything I could think to prepare him for. The family dynamics, the way they might interrogate him, the way they might ignore me while showering Rebecca with attention or focusing on Jason's recent baseball scholarship. I thought I was preparing him adequately. I was not. The dinner was excruciating from the moment we sat down. Mom arrived 15 minutes late with an elaborate story about traffic that everyone knew was fabricated. Dad barely looked up from his phone when I introduced David, offering a limp handshake and a grunt of acknowledgement. Rebecca arrived in a whirlwind of self-importance, fresh from taking the bar exam, talking loudly about how exhausting it had been and how she needed a vacation immediately. Jason, then a college freshman on a baseball scholarship, was the only one who seemed genuinely pleased to meet David, asking him questions about his work and his hobbies with real curiosity. The conversation during dinner revolved entirely around Rebecca's job prospects and Jason's baseball season. Every time I tried to steer the conversation to include David or talk about anything else, someone in my family would interrupt or talk over me. David tried several times to engage with my parents, asking polite questions about their lives and their work, but their responses were perfunctory and dismissive. Mom asked David exactly 2 questions during the entire 2-hour meal. What did he do for work, and how much did he make? When he gave a diplomatic answer about working in tech and doing well enough to be comfortable, she sniffed and said nothing further. The real disaster came when the check arrived. I had planned to split it with David, a normal arrangement between couples. But Dad grabbed the check, looked at the total, and pushed it toward David with a pointed look. "I assume you will be taking care of this since you invited us all out," he said. It was not a question. David, to his credit, did not flinch. He pulled out his credit card and paid the bill without comment. But I saw his jaw tighten and his posture stiffen, and I felt something crack inside me with shame and anger. In the car afterward, David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "That was not what I expected." I apologized profusely, making excuses for their behavior, explaining that they were just protective, that they were stressed about money, that they would warm up to him eventually. David listened and then said something that no one had ever said to me before. "You do realize that nothing you said just now was actually about whether they liked me, right? You were explaining why it is okay for them to treat you badly. And I am not sure it is okay." That observation opened a door I had been keeping firmly locked. Over the next few weeks, David asked questions that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Why did I work so much overtime but never seem to have savings? Why did my family call only when they needed something? Why did I always drop everything when they had a crisis, but they had not asked a single question about my life during that dinner? Why did I pay for family gifts and events that celebrated other people while my own birthdays passed with barely a card? I tried to defend them and defend the dynamic I had always accepted as normal. But David's questions had planted seeds that grew in the dark. I started noticing patterns I had trained myself not to see. I started feeling resentment I had taught myself to swallow. I started asking myself why I kept participating in a relationship structure that left me feeling depleted and unvalued. The answers were uncomfortable and painful and forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding for nearly 3 decades. The marriage proposal happened on a Saturday in April on a hiking trail we had discovered together, a moderate climb that opened up to a stunning view of the valley below. We had packed a lunch and spent the afternoon talking about everything and nothing, the easy conversation of people who have become genuinely comfortable with each other. At the summit, with the spring sun warming our faces and the valley spread out like a painting below us, David pulled a small box from his backpack and asked me to marry him. The ring was simple and beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light. I said yes with tears streaming down my face, feeling chosen and valued and seen in a way that made my chest ache with gratitude and relief. We decided to have a small wedding, intimate and personal, focused on celebrating our commitment rather than performing for an audience. We set a budget we could afford, chose a beautiful garden venue, and started planning. I was so excited to share the news with my family, still believing, despite everything, that they would be happy for me, that this would be a moment of joy we could share. I called my mother first, barely able to contain my excitement as I told her David had proposed. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Mom spoke, her voice flat and strange. "Well, that is certainly news. Have you thought about the timing of this? Your father and I are in a difficult financial position right now. The property taxes have gone up, and Dad's company is talking about layoffs. We were actually hoping to talk to you about a loan to help us get through the next few months until things stabilize. Maybe you should wait a bit before planning an expensive wedding." I felt my excitement shrivel like a balloon losing air. "Mom, David and I are paying for everything ourselves. We are keeping it small and simple. We are not asking you and Dad to contribute anything financially. It is not just about money," she said, and I could hear the edge creeping into her voice. "It is about priorities and family loyalty. Rebecca's going through a really rough time with her marriage right now. Tom is being difficult about her working late at the firm, and they have been fighting constantly. It would be devastating for her to watch you get married while her own marriage is falling apart. Do you ever think about anyone besides yourself? Do you ever consider how your choices affect the rest of us?" The unfairness of that statement hit me like a slap. "Mom, I am getting married. This is supposed to be a happy thing. I am not doing this at Rebecca to hurt her. I am doing this because I love David and he loves me and we want to build a life together. If you really loved your family, you would wait until the timing was better," Mom said coldly. "But I can see you have already made up your mind. You have always been stubborn and selfish. I do not know where we went wrong with you." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my apartment phone, still pressed to my ear, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. The calls from other family members started within hours. Dad left a voicemail saying he was disappointed in my lack of consideration for the family's circumstances. Rebecca sent a long text message accusing me of rubbing my happiness in her face and being a terrible sister. Jason was the only one who sent congratulations, though his message was brief and came with an apology that he probably would not be able to make it to the wedding because baseball season would be in full swing. The next few days were a blur of painful conversations and ultimatums. My family made their position clear. If I went through with the wedding as planned, they would not be attending. If I insisted on this selfish course of action, I was choosing to exclude them from my life. If I really loved them, I would postpone until the timing was better for everyone. They framed it as me abandoning them when I was simply trying to move forward with my own life. The emotional manipulation was so blatant that even I, conditioned to accept their version of reality, could see it clearly for the first time. I spent 3 days crying, barely eating, spiraling in guilt and confusion. David gave me space to process but made his support clear. On the third day, he sat me down at my kitchen table, took both my hands in his, and said something I will never forget. Listen to me very carefully. You are not responsible for managing your family's emotions. You are not required to sacrifice your happiness to spare them discomfort. You have been taught your entire life that your needs matter less than everyone else's, but that is a lie. Your needs matter. Your happiness matters. You matter. And if they cannot celebrate this moment with you, then they are showing you exactly how much they actually value you. I need you to decide right now who you want to be. The person who keeps shrinking to fit their expectations, or the person who stands up and says enough. That conversation was the fulcrum on which my entire life pivoted. I thought about Professor Chen telling me there was a difference between being selfless and being self-erasing. I thought about all the birthday parties that were canceled, and college funds that never existed, and loans that were never repaid. I thought about showing up for everyone else's important moments while mine were treated as inconveniences. I thought about who I had been trained to be versus who I wanted to become. And I made a choice that felt both terrifying and liberating. I called my mother the next day. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. Mom, I am getting married in May as planned. I love you and I would like you to be there, but I understand if you choose not to come. I am not postponing my life anymore to make things easier for everyone else. This is my decision and I am at peace with it. The explosion that followed was spectacular and devastating. Mom accused me of tearing the family apart. Dad sent an email listing every sacrifice they had ever made for me and every way I had been a disappointment. Rebecca called me selfish more times than I could count. They gave me a final ultimatum: cancel the wedding or accept that I was dead to them. I chose myself. For the first time in my entire life, I chose myself. The wedding took place on a perfect May afternoon in a botanical garden bursting with spring blooms. 30 people attended, friends and colleagues, and David's family, who welcomed me with warmth I had rarely experienced. My family was not there. No one walked me down the aisle. No parent gave a toast. No sibling stood beside me. The absence was a wound that throbbed with every beautiful moment, but it was also proof that I could survive, choosing myself, that I could build a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation and guilt. The first year of marriage was harder than I anticipated, not because of David, but because of the grief and guilt that haunted me. Every holiday felt wrong without family traditions I had grown up with. Every milestone passed without the calls or cards I had always hoped might come. I mourned the family I wished I had while trying to accept the family I actually had. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Linda Martinez, a woman in her 50s who specialized in family trauma. She was direct and compassionate, challenging my assumptions while validating my pain. In our sessions, Dr. Martinez introduced me to concepts that reframed my entire understanding of my family relationships. She taught me about enmeshment and codependency. She explained the difference between healthy interdependence and exploitative dynamics. She helped me see that the story I had been telling myself about my family, the one where I was the problem because I was not giving enough, was not actually true. She asked me to make lists. Times I had asked them for help versus times they had asked me. The ratio was staggering. Times they had celebrated my achievements versus times I had celebrated theirs. The imbalance was undeniable. Amount of money I had given them versus amount they had given me. The number made me feel physically ill. Dr. Martinez asked me to bring in the notebook I had mentioned, the one where I had been recording every financial transaction. Looking at it with her in the safety of her office, reading aloud the entries that spanned more than a decade, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the injustice. I had given my family over $47,000 across those years. They had never repaid a single cent. They had called it borrowing but treated it like tribute, like payment for the privilege of being tolerated by them. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild my sense of self outside the context of my family. I invested more deeply in friendships. I joined a photography club and started exhibiting my work at local galleries. I took pottery classes and discovered I loved working with clay. I read books about boundaries and healthy relationships. I practiced saying no to hypothetical requests in front of my bathroom mirror, strengthening muscles I had never been allowed to develop. I learned that my worth existed independent of my usefulness. I started to become someone I actually liked. 2 years into my marriage, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost sent it to voicemail, but something made me answer. It was Rebecca, her voice tight and formal, stripped of the casual cruelty that had characterized so many of our interactions. "I need to talk to you," she said without preamble. "Can we meet somewhere?" We met at a coffee shop in West Hartford, neutral territory that felt safer than anywhere associated with family memories. Rebecca looked tired, older than her 33 years, with shadows under her eyes and new lines around her mouth. We ordered coffee and sat across from each other in uncomfortable silence for a moment before she spoke. "Mom and Dad have been asking me for money," she said abruptly. "A lot of money. They said they are in financial trouble, that Dad might lose his job, that they are behind on the mortgage. They asked me for $15,000. Tom and I had a huge fight about it because he thinks I should say no, that they are taking advantage, but I felt so guilty. I gave it to them last month. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did they tell you what they needed it for, specifically?" "Dad's medical bills from a minor surgery he had, and catching up on mortgage payments." "Why? What is that tone in your voice?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the social media posts I had screenshotted but never confronted anyone about. Photos from 3 weeks earlier of our parents on a cruise through the Caribbean, smiling on the deck, posing at fancy dinners, swimming with dolphins, toasting with champagne. The dates coincided exactly with when Rebecca said she had given them the money. Rebecca stared at the photos, her face going pale. "No," she whispered. "No, they would not do that. There must be an explanation. Maybe they had already paid for the cruise before the financial trouble started. Maybe it was a gift from someone. Maybe." She trailed off, unable to convince even herself. "Rebecca, they did the same thing to me," I said quietly. "Multiple times over the years. The most recent was 3 months ago. They told me Dad had cancer and they were going to lose the house. I gave them $20,000 from my medical fund. I have cancer, Rebecca. Stage 2. I have been in treatment for 4 months. I gave them my treatment money because I believed them about the emergency." Rebecca's hands started shaking. Coffee sloshed over the rim of her cup onto the table. "You have cancer. Oh my God. Why did not you tell us? How long have you known?" "I was diagnosed 6 months ago. I did not tell you because we were not speaking, because I was told I was dead to the family when I chose to get married. Why would I reach out to tell you I was sick when you made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me?" She looked stricken, tears welling in her eyes. "I did not know. None of us knew. Mom never said anything about you being sick. She never mentioned that you had given them money. She made it sound like you had chosen to cut us off completely, that you thought you were too good for the family now that you were married. Did you ever consider reaching out to me directly to hear my side?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the anger bubbling underneath. "Did you ever question their version of events?" Rebecca looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. "No. I am ashamed to say I did not. I just accepted what they told me. It was easier than thinking too hard about it." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of revelation and years of dysfunction hanging between us. Finally, Rebecca spoke again. "What are you going to do? About the money they took from you?" "I already did something," I said. "I took them to court. Small claims court for the 20,000 plus court costs. I had documentation of the false emergency and their promise to repay. The judge ruled in my favor. They were ordered to pay me back in full." Rebecca looked shocked. "You sued our parents." "I reclaimed what they stole from me," I corrected. "They lied about why they needed the money. They took my cancer treatment fund and spent it on vacation while I was trying to figure out how to afford chemotherapy. What else was I supposed to do? Keep pretending it was okay?" Rebecca was crying openly now. "I do not know what to think. Everything I thought I understood about our family is wrong. I always thought you were just difficult, that you held grudges, that you were jealous of me and Jason. But you were being used. We all were, but you got the worst of it." "I did get the worst of it," I agreed. "Because I allowed it for far too long. Because I was taught that saying no was selfish, that having boundaries was cruel, that my needs were less important than everyone else's. It took me almost 30 years to understand that love is not supposed to feel like constant sacrifice with nothing in return. Rebecca asked questions about my cancer, about my treatment, about how I was managing financially after giving away my savings. I told her about David's support about my GoFundMe campaign that friends and strangers had contributed to, about the community that had shown up for me in ways my family never had. I told her about Dr. Martinez and the work I was doing to understand and heal from the family dynamics that had shaped me. I watched Rebecca processing all of this information, seeing her worldview crack and reshape in real time. We talked for 3 hours in that coffee shop. Rebecca told me about her own experiences with our parents that she was starting to see through new eyes. The way they had pitted us against each other as children. The way they had used competition and comparison to keep us from forming genuine sibling bonds. The way they had taught us that love was conditional and had to be earned through constant performance and sacrifice. She admitted that her marriage to Tom was struggling, in part because she had brought these patterns into it, expecting him to tolerate boundary violations from her family that he rightfully refused to accept. She asked if we could try to rebuild a relationship sister to sister separate from our parents' influence. I was honest with her. I said I was willing to try, but that trust had to be earned through consistent changed behavior, not just good intentions. I told her I had boundaries now that were not negotiable. She said she understood and that she wanted to learn how to have boundaries too, that she was starting to see how their dysfunction had infected every relationship in her life. We started meeting monthly for coffee, carefully building something new. It was awkward at first, both of us carrying decades of baggage and learned behaviors. But slowly we found ways to connect that did not involve competing or comparing or performing. We talked about our actual lives, our actual feelings, our actual struggles. We started to become real people to each other instead of just the roles we had played in the family drama. Meanwhile, my parents' behavior escalated. When the court order came through requiring them to repay me, they did not pay voluntarily. They ignored the judgment, forcing me to go through collections. They sent me letters calling me ungrateful and cruel. They told extended family their version of the story, painting me as a vindictive daughter who had sued her elderly parents over a misunderstanding. Most of the extended family believed them. I received emails from aunts and uncles and cousins telling me I was a disgrace, that family does not treat family this way, that I should be ashamed. I stopped trying to defend myself or explain my side. I learned that people who are determined to misunderstand you will find a way to do so regardless of evidence. I focused instead on my healing and my marriage and the chosen family I was building. I let the extended family believe what they wanted. Their opinions of me were based on incomplete information filtered through my parents' lies, and I could not control that. I could only control my own actions and boundaries. The collections process took 8 months and was emotionally exhausting. Every letter from the collections agency felt like picking at a wound. But eventually my parents' wages were garnished and I started receiving payments. They paid in angry increments, each check deposited without a note or acknowledgement. I put every penny directly toward my medical bills and savings. I refused to feel guilty about it. They had stolen from me. I had pursued legal means to reclaim what was mine. That was not cruelty. That was justice. My cancer treatment continued through all of this upheaval. Chemotherapy was brutal, leaving me weak and nauseous and bald. There were days I was not sure I would survive, not because of the cancer itself, but because of the exhaustion of fighting it while also fighting to reclaim my life and identity. But David was there through every treatment, every setback, every small victory. My chosen family showed up with meals and rides to appointments and hands to hold during the hardest moments. The contrast between their support and my biological family's absence was stark and painful and ultimately healing. I had good days and bad days. Days when I felt strong and clear about my choices, and days when guilt and grief threatened to swallow me whole. Dr. Martinez reminded me that healing is not linear, that I was allowed to grieve the family I had wanted, while also maintaining boundaries with the family I actually had. She helped me see that choosing myself was not the same as rejecting them. They had rejected me first by refusing to see me as anything other than a resource to be exploited. 3 years after my wedding, I am in remission. My hair has grown back darker and curlier than before. I have gained back the weight I lost during treatment. I feel strong in my body again, but more importantly, I feel strong in myself. I have learned to recognize manipulation and refuse to engage with it. I have learned that saying no is not a betrayal, but an act of self-respect. I have learned that I am worthy of relationships that are reciprocal and respectful. Rebecca and I continue to meet regularly. She started her own therapy to work through the family dysfunction and its impact on her life. She and Tom are in couples counseling, working to rebuild their marriage on healthier foundations. She has started setting boundaries with our parents, though she maintains more contact with them than I do. I respect her choices while being clear about my own. We are learning to be siblings in a real way, not just roles assigned by a dysfunctional system. Jason reached out to me about a year ago after his college graduation. He apologized for not being there during my cancer treatment, for not questioning the family narrative about me, for taking the easy path of going along with our parents' version of events. He said that moving away for college and then starting his career had given him perspective he did not have before. He could see patterns now that he had been blind to growing up. He asked if we could talk, if I would give him a chance to know me as an actual person, rather than the role I had played in the family. We are taking it slow, but I am cautiously hopeful that we might build something genuine. My parents and I have not spoken since the court case ended. They have never apologized. They have never acknowledged their role in the damage they caused. They send Christmas cards addressed only to David, a petty gesture that might have hurt me once but now just seems sad. I have accepted that they will never be the parents I needed them to be. I have stopped hoping for change or reconciliation. I have grieved the family I wanted and made peace with the family I actually have, which is the one I have chosen and built for myself. I changed careers, eventually going back to school to become a licensed clinical social worker specializing in family systems and trauma. I use my experience to help others who are trapped in similar dynamics, who have been taught that their worth is measured by their utility, who are struggling to choose themselves without drowning in guilt. My story helps my clients see that change is possible, that healing is possible, that you can grieve what you lost while building something better. David and I bought a small house last year with a garden where I grow vegetables and flowers. I have a photography studio in the converted garage where I shoot portraits and edit my work. I exhibit in local galleries and occasionally sell pieces. I make art that feels honest and meaningful rather than desperate for approval. I have friends who celebrate my successes and support me through my struggles without keeping score. I have built a life that belongs to me, shaped by my choices and my values, not by obligation or guilt or the endless pursuit of conditional approval. Sometimes people ask me if I regret taking my parents to court, if I wish I had tried harder to reconcile, if I miss having a relationship with my biological family. The answer is complex and evolving. I grieve for the parents I deserved to have and did not get. I grieve for the childhood I should have had, where my needs mattered and my worth was not measured by my utility. I grieve for the years I spent erasing myself to make room for everyone else. But I do not regret standing up for myself. I do not regret drawing boundaries that protect my peace. I do not regret choosing survival over compliance. The greatest gift I have given myself is the understanding that I deserve to exist as a full person, not just a supporting character in everyone else's story. I deserve relationships that feed my soul rather than drain it. I deserve to have needs and express them without shame. I deserve to say no without explaining or justifying or apologizing. Everyone deserves these things. If you are reading this and seeing yourself in my story, please know that you deserve these things too. Your worth is not measured by how much you can endure. Your value is not determined by how much you can give, until you have nothing left. You are not responsible for managing other people's emotions or fixing their problems at the expense of your own well-being. You are allowed to have boundaries. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to choose you. Have you ever had to choose between maintaining a toxic relationship and protecting your own well-being? What helped you find the courage to set boundaries? I would love to hear your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about healing from family trauma and building a life on your own terms. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, that choosing yourself is not selfish, and that there is life and joy and freedom on the other side of those difficult choices. Remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you do not owe anyone access to you at the cost of your own peace.